In the pouring rain outside a Spokane supermarket, my son's mother-in-law snapped from the back seat, "Just drop her off, your wife can't miss her nail appointment." Without hesitation, my son left me and 4 heavy grocery bags alone in the cold downpour and drove away. 9 days later, I completely vanished from the life they thought they controlled. When my son rushed home and panicked, asking the housekeeper, "Where is my mother?" Her answer and the white envelope she quietly produced left him utterly speechless. "Welcome to Silent Revenge with Phoenix. Thank you for being here. Tell me your city or country in the comments. Let me know you're out there." Note some details are fictionalized for dramatic effect. Any similarity to existing names or locations is coincidental, but the message at its heart is something we can all learn from. The rain started just before noon, and it didn't ease up the way May rain in Spokane usually does, that polite, apologetic drizzle that lasts 20 minutes and then moves on. This was the kind of rain that means business. It came down in sheets across the parking lot of the Walmart, on Sullivan Road, turning the asphalt dark and filling the low spots between the painted lines with shallow rivers that spread and merged and had nowhere to go. I was standing in the middle of all of it with 4 grocery bags cutting into my fingers and the trunk of my son's car already disappearing around the corner of the lot. I want to be precise about what I felt in that moment because I have had time to examine it carefully, and I think precision matters here. It was not shock. That is the word people reach for, but it isn't accurate. Shock implies surprise, and somewhere underneath the part of me that had spent 40 years choosing to look away, I was not surprised. What I felt was closer to the specific bone-deep exhaustion of a woman who has been holding her breath for a very long time and has just finally stopped. The bags were heavy. My right knee had been swollen since Thursday, the joint that had been giving me trouble since the winter, the one I kept meaning to have looked at and kept putting off, because there was always something else that needed doing first. I shifted the weight from one hand to the other and looked at the space where Brandon's car had been. He hadn't looked back. I had watched his brake lights flare red at the lot exit, then nothing. Just the gray curtain of rain and the sound of other people's cars moving through puddles and the particular silence of a woman standing alone in a place she had no way of getting home from. I had not driven myself. Brandon had offered to take me, insisted actually in the way he sometimes did when he wanted to appear helpful, without committing to the full weight of what helpfulness actually requires. I had accepted because my knee was bad, and because he was my son, and because accepting felt at the time like the reasonable thing to do. That was the last reasonable thing I did for a while. I started toward the store entrance thinking I would wait inside, call a cab, figure something out. I had gone maybe 30 feet when I heard a car horn. 2 short beeps, the friendly kind, and looked up to see a silver Subaru pulling to a stop at the curb 10 yards ahead of me. The window came down and a woman leaned across the passenger seat with an expression on her face that I recognized before I recognized the face itself. It was the expression of someone who is going to help you whether you want them to or not. Ruth Calloway. Clara Whitfield said, "Get in this car right now." I had known Clara since we were both 24 years old and working the same summer at a plant nursery on the east side of the city, back when Spokane felt enormous and full of possibility, and neither of us had any idea what our lives were going to turn into. 43 years of friendship. She had held my hand in the hospital the night Thomas died. I had driven 4 hours in a February snowstorm to sit with her when her husband Raymond passed 2 years later. We had the kind of friendship that doesn't require explanation or apology, the kind that simply shows up. She had been at the garden center next door buying tomato seedlings for the greenhouse at her flower farm on the north edge of the county. She had seen me through the fence line standing in the rain with my bags and my bad knee, and my particular posture of a woman who will not ask for help even when she is clearly drowning in a Walmart parking lot. She told me all of this after I got in the car, and she pressed a paper napkin into my hands because my fingers were red from the bag handles and my hair was flat against my forehead, and I apparently looked like something the eastern Washington weather had found and decided to keep. "Where's Brandon?" she asked. Her voice was careful. She had known Brandon since he was 4 years old. "He got a call," I said. "Jessica needed to be somewhere." Clara pulled out of the lot. She didn't say anything for a moment. I looked down at the 4 grocery bags I'd wedged between my feet on the passenger side floor. They were soaked through the paper, softening at the bottom, the handles going limp. That was when I actually looked at what was in them. Whole milk, the full fat kind Brandon had drunk since high school. The kind I stopped buying for myself 15 years ago because my doctor said so. A box of the specific low-sodium crackers Jessica kept on the counter for her 2 o'clock snack. 2 bottles of the ibuprofen Diane favored, the extra strength, the ones she left at our house, so she'd have them when she stayed over. A bottle of the shampoo. Brandon required the one with the green label from the specialty aisle that cost $11, and which he said was the only one that didn't irritate his scalp. I turned the bags over in my mind. There was arugula in there, the expensive pre-washed kind Jessica used in her salads. There was the particular brand of sparkling water. Diane wouldn't drink plain water, so Brandon kept stocked in the refrigerator for her visits. There was a box of the specific protein bars Brandon ate before his workouts. I had been in that store for 45 minutes. I had walked every relevant aisle. I had compared labels and checked expiration dates and carried everything to the cart with my bad knee complaining the whole way. I had stood in the checkout line for 12 minutes behind a man buying what appeared to be every variety of frozen pizza the store carried. And there was not a single item in those 4 bags that I had bought for myself. Not one. I had gone to the grocery store and shopped for 45 minutes, and not once in all of that time had I thought to buy something I wanted. I had moved through the store on autopilot, filling the cart with other people's preferences, other people's requirements, other people's $11 shampoo. And it had not struck me as unusual until this moment, sitting in Clara's car in a soaked coat, with my knee throbbing, watching the rain hit the windshield. "Clara," I said. My voice sounded strange to me, flat and very clear like a creek after a storm when the silt has all settled. "How long have I been doing this?" She glanced at me. She understood what I meant without my having to explain it, because that is the particular mercy of a 43-year friendship. "Long enough," she said quietly. "Too long." We drove in silence for a few minutes. The rain eased slightly, just enough to let the windshield wipers drop to a slower rhythm. Outside, Spokane passed by in its ordinary way strip malls and chain restaurants, and the flat, practical architecture of a city that has never been particularly interested in impressing anyone. "The car," Clara said then, not quite as a question. "What about it?" "The car he was driving." She kept her eyes on the road. "Whose name is it? Registered under—" I opened my mouth, then I closed it. I had purchased that car 3 years ago from the dealership on Division Street, a reliable 4-door sedan that I'd chosen specifically because it was sensible and safe, and the kind of vehicle a person could drive for 10 years without trouble. I had signed the paperwork. I had written the check. Brandon's truck had been in the shop. A transmission issue he'd said expensive to fix. Was I able to lend him the new car just temporarily while he sorted it out? That had been 3 years ago. The truck had apparently been fixed at some point. Brandon now drove it exclusively. The car I had purchased sat in the driveway of my house and was driven by my son every day, and I had not once in 3 years thought to ask why that arrangement had never been reversed. "Mine," I said. "It's registered to me." Clara nodded slowly. "Then the dash cam is yours too." I stared at her. Modern dash cams, the kind that came standard on that vehicle, the kind the dealership had activated as part of the connected vehicle package, recorded continuously whenever the ignition was running, and uploaded footage automatically to a cloud storage account linked to the vehicle's registration. The account was set up in the owner's name, my name. 3 years of footage, uploaded automatically. To a server I had never once thought to check. "Clara," I said slowly, "who do I call to access that—" She was already reaching for her phone. Clara's contact was a man named Doug, who ran a vehicle tech service out of a shop on Sprague Avenue and owed her a favor from the time she'd let him use her barn for 3 months of storage, when his lease fell through. She called him from the car, explained what she needed, and by the time we reached her house on the north edge of the county, he'd already remotely accessed the dashcam account and was pulling the relevant footage to a secure link he texted to Clara's phone. 40 minutes. That was all it took to retrieve the truth. Clara's kitchen table was old pine, the kind that had absorbed 15 years of coffee rings and flower soil, and the general warmth of a house that was actually lived in. She set her laptop on it, opened the link Doug had sent, and pulled out the chair beside her for me. I sat down. My knee was stiff from the ride, and I pressed my palm flat against it for a moment before I made myself stop because I did not want to spend the next however many minutes thinking about my knee. The footage loaded. Timestamp 12:09 p.m. The interior of the car was dim the way car interiors always look in dash cam footage, gray and slightly washed out, the dashboard controls glowing faint green. Through the windshield, the rain on Sullivan Road was coming down hard enough to make the lane markings disappear. I watched myself on the screen. I was sitting in the passenger seat with 2 grocery bags on my lap looking out the side window. I looked like a woman who was somewhere else in her head entirely. I looked relaxed, which was the thing that hit me first and hit me hardest, because I understood now what that relaxation had actually been, the particular ease of a person who has no idea that anything is about to happen. Brandon's phone lit up on the center console. The name on the screen read Jess. He picked up on the first ring. "Hey!" Jessica's voice came through the car speakers, clear and slightly impatient, the tone she used when she had already decided how a conversation was going to end. "Where are you? I need to be at Luxnail's studio by 1:15. Marta doesn't hold appointments." 20 minutes out, Brandon said. "That's too long." A beat of silence. Then Diane's voice entered from the back seat, and my stomach tightened because I had not remembered until this moment that Diane had been in the car. She'd been quiet the whole drive. I had nearly forgotten she was there. "Just drop her off somewhere," Diane said. Her voice was relaxed, almost bored, the voice of a woman giving directions she considered obvious. "She's got her bags. There's a bench by the entrance." "It's raining pretty hard," Brandon said, but his voice had already changed. The resistance in it was thin, the kind that exists only long enough to be overridden. "Oh, for heaven's sake!" Diane's voice sharpened just slightly. "She's not made of sugar, Brandon. Your wife has an appointment. The woman can wait 15 minutes under an awning. She's not helpless." 3 seconds of silence. Then, "Yeah." Brandon's voice went flat and decided, "You're right." He was already slowing the car. "Mom's fine, it's just a little rain." On the screen, I watched my own head turn toward him as the car pulled toward the curb. I watched my mouth move. I had asked something, I remembered asking something, but the audio caught only the tail end of it, a single word that might have been my name or might have been nothing. Brandon said, "I'll send someone to pick you up," and opened his door. The timestamp read 12:13 p.m. 41 seconds later, the car was back on Sullivan Road and accelerating. Jessica said, "Thank you, babe." The warmth in her voice was immediate and uncomplicated, the warmth of someone whose request has just been fulfilled without difficulty. Diane said, "She'll be fine. She always makes everything into a production." Brandon said nothing. He merged into the left lane, and the footage caught his face in the rearview mirror for exactly 2 seconds before the angle shifted, and what I saw in those 2 seconds was not guilt, and it was not conflict. It was the particular blankness of a man who has made a decision he's already stopped thinking about. Clara reached over and closed the laptop. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside the window, her flower fields ran long and straight in the gray afternoon light, rows of early season color, bending slightly in the wind off the hills. I could hear the refrigerator humming. I could hear my own breathing, which was slower than I expected. "Ruth." Clara's voice was careful and steady and full of something she was working hard to keep out of her face. "Say something. My hands were flat on the pine table. I looked at them, the knuckles, the veins, the particular look of hands that have spent 68 years doing the work that needed doing, and I felt something move through my chest that I did not have a clean name for. Not rage, not grief. Something older and heavier than either the feeling of a door closing on something you had kept believing in, long past the point where belief made sense. "Save the file," I said. My voice came out completely steady, which surprised me. "All of it. Send a copy to Martin Reed." I looked up at Clara. "And tomorrow morning I need to see a doctor about this knee." Clara nodded. Her eyes were bright in a way that told me she was holding more emotion than I was allowing myself to feel right now, and that she understood why, and that she would hold it for me until I was ready. She opened her phone and started to type. The waiting room at the Sullivan Road Family Clinic smelled like hand sanitizer and burnt coffee, and the particular staleness of a room where people sit with things they don't want to be true and wait for someone in a white coat to tell them otherwise. Clara had insisted on coming. She sat beside me in one of the padded chairs with her reading glasses pushed up on her head and her phone in her lap, and every few minutes she glanced at me. The way a person glances at something they are quietly worried about, but have decided not to say out loud. I appreciated that. I did not need anyone to say it out loud. The nurse who called my name was young, efficient, the kind of person who moved through a room like she had 17 other things to do, and was being generous by making this one of them. She took my blood pressure, noted my weight, typed something into the tablet she carried without looking up. Then she opened my electronic health record, and her fingers went still on the screen. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. The pause. But I had been watching for it. "Mrs. Calloway," she said carefully, "I'm going to have Dr. Marcus come in to talk with you before the knee exam. He just wants to touch base." She smiled with the practiced warmth of someone who has been trained to deliver information without delivering information. "What's in the file?" I said. She looked up. I held her gaze without blinking and without softening my expression, and she made the calculation that some people make when they realize the person across from them is not going to be managed. "There's a note," she said, "from your son. He contacted Dr. Marcus about 6 weeks ago, expressed concern about some memory issues he'd been observing. Dr. Marcus added a notation: family concern reported possible early cognitive decline, pending formal evaluation." The words landed in my chest like stones dropped into still water one at a time, each one sending out rings that spread and kept spreading. I pressed my hands flat against my thighs and breathed in slowly through my nose. 6 weeks ago, I said. "Yes, ma'am." I turned to Clara. Her jaw was tight and her eyes had gone the particular bright, controlled way they went when she was furious and had decided that fury was not useful right now. "Cancel the knee exam," I said to the nurse. "I need a full independent neurological evaluation today. Ordered by me, not by my family. Can that be arranged here, or do I need to go somewhere else?" The nurse opened her mouth, closed it, and went to find the doctor. Clara was already on her phone. She had spent 20 years as a patient care coordinator at Providence Sacred Heart Medical Center before she retired to run the flower farm, and she still had contacts in half the medical offices in Spokane County. By the time Dr. Marcus appeared in the doorway with his careful, conciliatory expression, Clara had already secured a same-day appointment at the Spokane Neurology Institute with Dr. Patricia Holt, who ran the cognitive assessment program there and who owed Clara a professional courtesy from a referral chain that went back 8 years. We were at the Neurology Institute by 11. Dr. Patricia Holt was 60 years old, compact and precise, with the kind of direct eye contact that told you immediately she was not going to waste your time or hers. She shook my hand, reviewed my medical history on her tablet, and then spent the next 2 hours running me through the most thorough cognitive evaluation I had ever encountered. Memory sequences forward and backward, pattern recognition on a series of cards, verbal fluency tests: name every animal you can think of in 60 seconds, name every word that starts with the letter F, spatial orientation, mathematical reasoning. She asked me the current date, the name of the sitting governor of Washington, the address where I had lived at age 12. She asked me to draw a clock face showing 10 minutes after 11. She asked me to remember a series of 5 unrelated words, table sunset iron courage envelope, and recall them 20 minutes later, which I did in order without hesitation. When it was over, Dr. Holt set her tablet on the desk between us and folded her hands on top of it. "Mrs. Calloway," she said, "your cognitive function is completely intact across every domain we tested. Memory processing speed, executive function, verbal reasoning, all of it falls solidly within normal range, and several scores are above average for your age group. There is no evidence of decline of any kind." "I need that in writing," I said, signed, dated, and certified with the clinic seal. She studied me for a moment, not with suspicion, but with the quiet attention of a woman who understood that what I was asking for was not vanity. "I'll have the documentation ready by 8 tomorrow morning," she said. Then she paused. "Whatever is happening in your family right now, I hope you have someone good in your corner." I thought of Clara sitting in the waiting room outside with her reading glasses and her phone and her 20 years of knowing exactly which calls to make. "I do," I said. On the way out, walking through the glass lobby with my certified appointment card in my hand and the afternoon light cutting long and pale across the tile floor, I felt something shift in my chest. Not relief exactly, but something adjacent to it. The specific steadiness of a woman who has just added the first stone to a foundation she's going to need to be very solid. Clara was holding the door open. She looked at my face and read it the way she had been reading my face for 43 years. "Martin needs to know about the notation in that file," she said. "Today." "I know," I said. "But first, tell me everything you know about Brandon's finances." Clara answered my question about Brandon's finances the way she answered most difficult questions, slowly, and only after she had decided that the truth was more useful than the alternative. She told me enough for the drive back to her house to feel longer than it was, and for the fields outside the window to blur past without registering, and for my mind to travel backward the way minds do when they are trying to locate the exact moment a thing began, all the way to the 18th of April, 6 weeks before the parking lot, 6 weeks before the rain. Thomas had been gone 3 years to the day. The restaurant had a private room in the back with cream-colored walls and soft lighting, and a long table that seated 20 on each side. Brandon had arranged everything the white chrysanthemums Thomas had always grown along the south fence of our property, the framed photograph of Thomas on the oak credenza near the entrance, the good wine that Thomas had kept for occasions. 53 people came. Neighbors, former colleagues, members of the church we had attended for 30 years, a handful of Brandon's business associates whose names I could never hold on to. I had worn the blue dress Thomas liked. I had stood at the door and thanked people for coming and felt the particular bittersweet weight of a room full of people who had loved the same man you loved. All of you, carrying him differently. None of you able to give him back to each other. Diane sat at the far end of the table near the window. Jessica sat beside her. They had arrived together, which I noted at the time and filed away without examining the way you file away small things that don't yet have a category. Gary Pruitt. Jessica's father, a commercial land developer who had made his money in property acquisition across eastern Washington and who wore that fact with the comfortable visibility of a man who had never seen a reason to be modest about it, sat 3 seats down from Diane. He had attended every family event for the past 4 years with the quiet, patient presence of someone who is watching an investment develop on its own timeline. Halfway through the main course, Brandon stood up and lifted his glass. The table settled. I set down my fork and looked at my son at the careful, practiced warmth in his expression, the slight squaring of his shoulders that meant he had rehearsed this, and felt a small, cold pressure begin somewhere behind my sternum. "I want to say something about my father tonight," Brandon began, "and about what he built, and about the responsibility that comes with inheriting something real." He paused, letting the room give him its full attention. Mom and I have had some conversations recently about the future of the property, about what it means to carry something forward instead of letting it sit. And I'm proud to say that she has agreed that the farm and the workshop will be transitioning to Jessica and me so we can build on everything Dad worked for. The applause started before I could process the sentence. I sat at that table with my water glass in my hand and felt the blood leave my face so completely that I was briefly grateful for the dim lighting. Brandon was still talking. Timelines, improvements, his vision for what the property could become, and every person in that room was nodding and smiling, and not one of them was watching me carefully enough to see that I had not agreed to a single word of what had just been said. Not one conversation, not one document, not my signature on anything, not even a question asked of me in private. I had agreed to nothing. At the far end of the table, Gary Pruitt lifted his glass in Brandon's direction. Not a toast, something quieter than that. The small, controlled acknowledgement of a man watching the first piece of a plan move into position. My fingers found the slim recording pen clipped to the inside of my jacket, the one Clara had pressed into my hands 8 months earlier, after a boundary dispute with a neighboring property left me wishing I had documented a conversation that had gone differently in the retelling. She had said, "Keep it charged, Ruth. You never know." I had worn it tonight out of habit more than intention. I pressed the button. Brandon finished to warm applause and sat down and leaned across to squeeze my hand. His palm was dry and his smile was the smile I had known since he was 4 years old, open and certain, and absolutely confident in its own welcome. "This is what Dad would have wanted," he said. I squeezed his hand back. I said, "He would have been proud of you." And I kept the recorder running all the way through dessert, through the goodbyes at the door, through the drive home in the dark, all the way until I was sitting alone in Thomas's study, with the lights off and the recorder still warm in my palm. That was when I thought about the jacket. The previous December, I had driven 40 minutes into the city to buy Jessica a camel-colored leather jacket from a boutique on Main Avenue, a coat I had seen her pause in front of for a long moment before moving on. I had thought first winter as family do something that says welcome. I had spent more than I was comfortable spending. I had wrapped it carefully and set it under the tree. She had opened it at Christmas dinner, looked at it for 2 seconds and said, "Oh, this color's a little dated, isn't it?" Then she turned to Brandon and asked him something about his phone. I had thought I chose the wrong shade. I had told myself to ask more questions next time. I had kept trying for 3 more Christmases, after that different gifts, different gestures, the same result, and in all that time it had never once occurred to me that the problem was not the color of the jacket. Sitting in the dark in Thomas's study, recorder in hand, I finally let myself understand what I had been refusing to see. She had never intended to be won over, and Brandon had never intended to stop her. Martin Reed's office was on the 4th floor of a building on Riverside Avenue that had been there since 1987 and smelled like it old carpet radiator heat and the particular mustiness of files that had been accumulating longer than some of his clients had been alive. He had practiced family and civil law in Spokane for 31 years, and in all that time I had never once called him before, 8 in the morning. I called him at 6:45 on the 14th of May. He picked up on the second ring. That was Martin, no preamble, no performance of surprise, just, "Tell me what you need," I told him. When I finished, he said, "I'll have coffee ready. Come at 8. He was already on his second cup when Clara and I walked in. Martin Reed was 63 years old, broad-shouldered, with reading glasses he wore on a cord around his neck, and the kind of steady, unhurried attention that came from 3 decades of sitting across tables from people in the worst moments of their lives and learning that the most useful thing he could offer was to treat their problems like problems that could be solved. He shook my hand, shook Clara's, poured 2 more cups without asking, and sat down. I laid everything on the table. The dashcam footage, the recording from the memorial dinner, the notation in my medical file, Dr. Holt's pending certification. I told him about the grocery bags and the jacket and the 3 years of small erasures I had been explaining away as misunderstandings. Martin listened without interrupting. He took notes in the cramped, precise handwriting he had used for as long as I had known him, and when I finished, he was quiet for exactly 4 seconds before he opened his laptop. Jessica Calloway, he said, Facebook and TikTok. He found it in under 2 minutes. The page was called Caring for Mom, Our Daily Journey. The profile photo was a picture of Jessica and me taken at Brandon's company picnic 2 summers ago, her arm around my shoulders, both of us squinting into the sun. She looked warm and devoted. I looked like someone who had no idea a photograph was being taken. 5,214 followers. Martin turned the screen so I could see it fully, and I leaned forward and read. The first post was from 4 months ago. A photograph of me asleep in the armchair in the living room, head tilted back, mouth slightly open, the afternoon light coming through the window in a way that made me look older than I felt. The caption read, "Some days are harder than others. We just keep showing up." The second post showed the kitchen sink stacked with unwashed dishes, a dish towel crumpled on the counter, the general appearance of a kitchen that had been deliberately neglected. The caption, "Doing our best one day at a time, grateful for this journey even on the hard days." The third post, and this was the one that made my jaw tighten until I felt it in my back teeth, showed my blood pressure medication. The orange prescription bottles arranged on the bathroom floor, caps off pills scattered across the tile as though someone had knocked them over in confusion. The caption, "Keeping track of everything so she doesn't have to. Some days I'm a nurse, some days I'm a daughter, always grateful." I pulled back from the screen. "That sink," I said. My voice was very controlled. "I washed those dishes before I went to bed that night. I remember it specifically because the hot water was running slow, and I had to let the tap run for a full minute before it came up to temperature." I looked at Martin. "Someone unstacked them after I went to sleep." "And the medication?" Clara asked, her voice tight. "On the shelf above the toilet," I said, "where it has been for 6 years. I did not scatter it on the floor." Martin was already writing. The metadata on these posts will show the exact time each photo was taken, the device used, and the IP address of the account. I'm going to contact a digital forensics firm I've worked with before they'll preserve everything exactly as it exists right now, timestamps and all, in a format that holds up in civil court. He looked up at me over his reading glasses. "Ruth, this is a deliberate pattern. 4 months of documented posts. She was building a public record." "For the conservatorship," Clara said. "For the conservatorship," Martin confirmed. "In Washington state, to petition the court for a guardianship or conservatorship over an adult, you need to demonstrate that the individual lacks the capacity to manage their own affairs. Medical documentation helps, but a public record of observed decline, corroborated by family testimony, strengthens the petition considerably." He set his pen down. Someone understood that. I thought about Gary Pruitt, the way he had sat at the end of the memorial table with his folded hands and his patient, satisfied attention. The way he had lifted his glass when Brandon finished speaking. The specific stillness of a man who has been waiting for something to arrive and has just watched it take its first step. "Gary Pruitt," I said. "Tell me what you know about him." Martin reached for a second folder he had pulled before we arrived. "That," he said, "is exactly where this gets worse." Gary Pruitt had been developing commercial property in eastern Washington for 32 years, and if you read the press releases and the Civic Foundation newsletters and the occasional profile in the Spokesman Review, you would come away with the impression of a man who had built something real through persistence and vision and a genuine commitment to the economic growth of the region. Martin's folder told a different story. 3 Chapter 11. Filings across 2 decades, each one restructured behind a new corporate entity, while Gary himself remained untouched. 2 breach of contract lawsuits from former partners, both settled under confidentiality agreements. A 3rd suit filed by a subcontractor in Adams County still pending, alleging that Gary had misrepresented a project's financial condition to secure labor and materials before dissolving the entity and walking away clean. "He is very good," Martin said, "at making money appear where he needs it and disappear where he doesn't." I thought about the way Gary had sat at the memorial dinner, the folded hands, the patient watching stillness of a man who has already decided how things are going to go and is simply waiting for the timeline to catch up with his conclusions. "The farm," I said. Martin nodded. "Your property sits directly on the projected corridor for a federal highway expansion interstate connection between Spokane and the Tri-Cities. The routing hasn't been officially announced, but the draft environmental impact study was filed with the county 6 months ago. It's public record if you know what to look for." He turned a page. "Your land would be worth approximately 4 times its current appraised value the day that announcement goes public. Gary Pruitt has been positioning to acquire it for at least 18 months. Clara made a sound beside me that was not quite a word. "And Brandon's company," I said. "Callaway Construction is carrying $3,800,000 in outstanding debt across 4 creditors." Martin set the page down flat on the desk. "2 banks have issued formal demand letters in the past 90 days. The company has not turned an operating profit in 14 months. Jessica's boutique chain is performing similarly." He paused. "Ruth, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer it carefully." "Go ahead." 8 years ago, when Brandon was starting out, you signed a personal guarantee on his business loan. Do you remember that?" I remembered it precisely. Brandon had come to me in the kitchen on a Tuesday evening in March, a manila folder under his arm and the particular energy of a young man who's been rehearsing a conversation and is relieved to finally be having it. The bank would lend him the capital he needed to grow the company, he said, but they required additional security, a personal guarantee from a creditworthy cosigner, just to get him started. He would refinance within 3 years, at which point my name would come off the paperwork entirely. That had been 8 years ago. $2.5 million, Martin said. "Your deposit account at First Mountain Bank has been serving as the collateral backing his primary credit line since 2016. Every low-interest loan he has accessed in that time, every line of credit, every favorable term from his lenders, all of it has been possible because your name and your assets were standing behind him." He looked at me steadily. "He has never refinanced. Your name has never come off the paperwork." The room was very quiet except for the radiator ticking against the far wall. I thought about Brandon at 23 years old, standing in my kitchen with a check in his hand. $2,800, the first payment from the first contract he had landed on his own. He had set it on the counter in front of me, and his hands were shaking slightly, and his eyes were bright with the specific pride of a young man who has just proven something to himself that he was not entirely sure he could prove. "Mom," he had said, "I made it." I had pulled him into a hug and held him the way you hold a child you have been frightened, for the grip that says, "I knew you could, and thank God." I had told him I was proud of him. I had not told him what it had cost to get him to that kitchen on that Tuesday morning with that check in his hands. Thomas's watch, the one his father had given him, the one he wore every day for 30 years, I had sold that the previous November to cover the gap between what I had and what Brandon's tuition required. I had told Thomas I'd had it repaired. He had never noticed it was a different watch on my wrist, which told me something about how much he trusted me and something about how much I had been willing to absorb alone. The ticking of the radiator brought me back. "Can the guarantee be revoked?" I asked. "Immediately," Martin said. "You are cognitively intact. Dr. Holt's certification makes that unassailable. A guarantor retains full right of revocation at any time, provided they have legal capacity, which you demonstrably do. I can draft the revocation document this afternoon." He paused. "Ruth, the moment that revocation is filed, the bank will issue a notice of default. Brandon will have 30 days under his loan agreement to either refinance or repay. Given the company's current position, refinancing is not realistic." I looked at the photograph of Thomas I kept in my wallet, the one from our first year on the farm, him standing at the fence line in his work coat, squinting into the afternoon sun, looking like a man exactly where he was supposed to be. "Draft it," I said. "And Martin, I need one more thing. Tell me how to build a living trust." Martin reached for a fresh legal pad. "Then we have a lot to talk about," he said. "Before I show you what I found in that drawer, something that made my hands go completely still, type truth in the comments, so I know you're still here with me. And a quick note, the next part of this story contains some fictionalized details crafted for reflection. If that's not for you, feel free to step away now, no hard feelings." Martin kept me for another hour after I asked about the living trust, walking me through the mechanics of it with the careful patience of a man who understood that what he was explaining was not just legal architecture, but the practical shape of a woman's future. By the time Clara and I walked back to her car on Riverside Avenue, the noon sun was cutting hard and white across the pavement, and my head was full of terms and timelines and the particular exhausting clarity of a person who has spent a morning learning exactly how much danger she is in. Clara offered to come with me. I told her no. There are things a person needs to do alone, not because they are stronger alone, but because some truths need to be received in private, in the specific silence of a house that belongs to you, where you can let your face do whatever it needs to do without anyone watching. Brandon and Jessica had left for Seattle the previous evening, a 2-day trade show for her boutique suppliers, a trip that had been on the calendar for weeks. The house would be empty until Thursday. I had a window, and I intended to use it. I turned onto our road at 12:30 and sat in the driveway for a moment before going in. The farmhouse looked the way it always looked on a clear May afternoon, the white paint catching the light, the blue spruce Thomas had planted the year we moved in, throwing a long shadow across the front porch, the window boxes I had filled with petunias every spring for 30 years, because Thomas had said once in passing that he liked the color. I had planted them every year since he died, too. I had not examined that habit until now. The house was quiet in the way that houses are quiet when they have been holding themselves still waiting. I went straight to the back hallway. Brandon's office had been Thomas's reading room first, a small square space with built-in shelves and a window that looked out onto the vegetable garden and the kind of afternoon light that fell across a desk at exactly the right angle for working. Thomas had spent 30 years of Sunday afternoons in that room. I had given it to Brandon 6 years ago when he started helping with the property paperwork because it seemed like the right thing to do, and because I had believed at the time that sharing the room was a way of carrying Thomas forward. I knew every drawer in that desk. The insurance documents I needed were in the second drawer on the right side, the same place they had lived for 15 years. I reached for the correct drawer, found the folder, and was turning to leave when something made me stop. I do not know what it was, some accumulation of small wrongnesses, some instinct honed by 68 years of paying attention to things that didn't quite fit. I reached for the third drawer instead. It was heavier than it should have been. The folder inside was navy blue, the color of a business suit, with a white adhesive label on the tab. The label read in Jessica's looping handwriting, Pine Haven Private Care Center, Chattaroy, WA. I carried it to the desk lamp and turned it on. The first page was an admissions application. Under patient name, my full name. Under date of birth, my birthday. Under primary diagnosis, the typed words read, age-related cognitive decline. Progressive. Patient unable to manage independent daily living. Family has determined full-time supervised residential care is in patient's best interest. Under admitting family representative Jessica Calloway's signature, dated April 28th. My jaw tightened so hard I felt it in my temples. The second page was a room confirmation. A private room on the second floor of the facility's east wing with a garden-facing window deposit already processed from an account carrying my personal information that I had never authorized anyone to access. The third page was the care plan, a daily schedule printed in neat columns: breakfast at 7:30, medication review at 8, supervised morning activities, lunch at noon, afternoon rest period, dinner at 5:30, lights out at 9. The medication section listed 3 prescriptions. I read each one carefully. I had been prescribed none of them. The third one, listed simply as a sleep cycle regulation support, was a sedative. They had already selected which drug would keep me manageable. The fourth page was a handwritten transition timeline on yellow legal paper. Jessica's handwriting again, each entry dated with the precision of someone who had been planning this the way you plan a construction project, in phases with contingencies. April 28th, contract signed and filed. May 15th, title transfer complete. May 25, transport to Pine Haven arranged. Note conservatorship petition to be filed May 10th. Hearing estimated within 30 days. Contract contingent on court approval of petition. That last line stopped me completely. The contract was contingent on conservatorship approval, which meant this document sitting in Brandon's desk drawer was a blueprint that required the court to first declare me legally incapable of managing my own affairs. The Facebook page, the notation in my medical file, the memorial dinner speech, all of it had been feeding a legal petition they intended to file in 6 days. Every piece of staged evidence had been aimed at a single target, a courtroom, a judge, and a declaration that Ruth Calloway could no longer be trusted with her own life. May 25th, 11 days away. I did not throw the folder. I did not make a sound. I opened the camera on my phone and photographed every page front and back close enough to read timestamp visible in the corner of each frame and sent them directly to Martin with a message that contained 4 words. Blue folder. Call me now. I replaced the folder in the drawer exactly as I had found it. I took the insurance documents I had originally come for. I walked out of that room down the hallway and through the kitchen to the back door, and I stood on the porch for a moment in the May afternoon, looking at the vegetable garden Thomas had built with his own hands, the raised beds, still holding the shape he had given them, the soil dark, and waiting for the season. I took out my phone and called Clara. "The flower farm," I said when she picked up. "Does the guest room have a working heater, Ruth?" Her voice shifted immediately. "What did you find?" "Enough," I said. "I need 9 days. Can you give me 9 days?" Martin had the documents ready by 7:45 the following morning. 3 of them laid out in a row across his desk with the precise, unhurried arrangement of a man who understood that what he was asking me to sign would change things in ways that could not be undone. The revocation of my personal guarantee on Brandon's business loans, the living trust transferring all real property, the farmhouse, the acreage, the workshop into a trust structure, managed jointly by me and Clara, insulated from any conservatorship petition or probate challenge, and a new will replacing the one I had signed 11 years ago in the first raw weeks after Thomas died, when I had been in no condition to think clearly about anything and had simply written Brandon's name wherever Martin pointed. I picked up the pen. My hand was steady. I want to be clear about that, not because steadiness is the same as certainty, but because I had spent 68 years confusing the two, and I was done with that particular confusion. My hand was steady, and my chest was full of something that had no clean name, not grief, not anger, something older and more permanent than either the feeling of a woman setting down a weight she had been carrying so long she had stopped noticing it was there. I signed all 3. Martin filed the guarantee revocation with First Mountain Bank before noon. The living trust was recorded with the Spokane County Auditor's Office by 2 o'clock. The new will went into his fireproof safe with a certified copy sent to a secondary attorney he trusted. I drove home one last time at 4 in the afternoon. Evelyn Morse had worked in my house for 11 years. Tuesdays and Fridays, sometimes Saturdays during the holidays, a woman of 58 with the particular unshowy competence of someone who had been doing difficult work for a long time and had never needed anyone to notice. She was in the kitchen when I came in, and she took one look at the canvas bag on my shoulder and the set of my face, and she did not ask a single question. That was the thing about Evelyn. She had always understood the difference between what needed saying and what needed doing. I told her enough. I gave her the white envelope. I told her to give it to Brandon when he asked, not before, only when he asked, and she pressed it into the front pocket of her apron and straightened it carefully and said, "Yes, ma'am," in the voice she used when she had decided something without needing to announce it. I was at Clara's flower farm before dark. The 9 days that followed were the quietest I had known in years. I split firewood in the mornings. I read on the porch in the afternoons. I slept 8 hours a night in the spare room with the window cracked and the smell of Clara's roses coming through the screen and the particular silence of a rural Washington night pressing itself gently against everything. Every evening at 6, I opened the security camera app on my phone and watched my own house from across the county. Day 3, Diane directing a young man to take Thomas's photographs down from the living room wall and carry them to the garage in a cardboard box. Day 5, contractors arriving with a sledgehammer to open the wall between Thomas's reading room and the master bedroom. Day 7. Gary Pruitt walking my fence line with a surveyor and a yellow legal pad stopping at intervals, pointing at the tree line, making notes about land that had not yet become his and never would. I watched all of it from Clara's kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold beside me, and I did not look away from a single frame. Martin called on the morning of the 9th day. His voice was different, quieter, and more certain. "The bank sent Brandon a notice of default 40 minutes ago," he said. "He's been trying to reach you for the past hour." I looked out the kitchen window at the long rows of Clara's flower fields, pale yellow and coral and white in the early morning light, running straight and patient all the way to the tree line. "Tell Evelyn he can come home," I said. Evelyn told me everything 2 days later, sitting at Clara's kitchen table with her coffee going cold, recreating every detail with the quiet precision of a woman who understood that what she had witnessed would matter. Brandon had come through the front door at 10:30 in the morning, calling my name before he even had both feet inside the foyer. "Mom." His voice bounced off the high entryway walls and came back empty. He called again louder, but the house gave him only that specific, heavy silence of rooms that have been holding themselves still. Evelyn walked out of the kitchen with a dish towel in her hands, holding herself with the calm posture of someone who had decided long beforehand exactly how she would handle this moment. Brandon's eyes snapped to her. "Where is she?" "She left," Evelyn said simply, 9 days ago. He stared at her. Behind him, Diane stepped through the doorway, followed closely by Jessica. The 3 of them stood in the entry hall staring at Evelyn the way people look at something that has just completely shattered a reality they took for granted. 9 days. Brandon's voice cracked on the second word. "She's been gone 9 days and you didn't call me." "She asked me not to," Evelyn said. Her hands rested still on the towel. She didn't fidget. She didn't look away. Brandon crossed the room in 4 long strides, stopping close enough that Evelyn could see the tight muscle jumping in his jaw. His voice dropped to a low, pressurized hiss. "Evelyn, where is my mother?" Without a word, Evelyn reached into the front pocket of her apron and produced the white envelope I had left with her. She held it out. He snatched it. His hands were visibly shaking as his fingers tore across the top. He pulled out the single folded sheet inside and read it right there in the middle of the room, while Diane craned her neck to see over his shoulder, and Jessica crossed her arms, watching his face intently. He read it twice. Evelyn told me his first expression was sheer unguarded confusion, the look of a man encountering a version of his mother he never knew existed and had never prepared for. The second look was harder to name something much rawer than anger, quiet and devastating. He turned the page over and stared at the address I had written on the back. Jessica stepped forward and held out her hand. Brandon handed the letter to her without looking. She read it quickly, and her face did what it always did when meeting an obstacle. It tightened, assessing, calculating the next angle. "This doesn't change anything legally," she said. "We still have..." "Jessica." Brandon cut her off. His voice wasn't loud, but it held a finality that stopped her instantly, like a door latching shut from the inside. He looked at Evelyn one last time. She met his gaze and held it. Then he turned and walked out, down the front steps, across the gravel to his truck. Evelyn watched from the living room window as he climbed into the driver's seat and sat there for 22 minutes without starting the engine, not checking his phone, not moving, just gripping the steering wheel with his head bowed the way a man sits when he has nowhere left to go and nothing left to say. Finally, he started the engine and pulled away slowly. The address written on the back of that letter was the only place left to go. I heard his truck on the gravel road before I saw it. I was on my knees in Clara's rose bed, working a trowel through the soil around the base of a climbing rose that needed loosening, and when the sound of tires reached me, I did not stand up immediately. I finished the row I was working. I set the trowel down. I pulled off my garden gloves one finger at a time and pressed my palms flat against my thighs and stood up slowly the way a woman stands when her knees remind her of her age and she does not resent them for it. Brandon stepped out of the truck. He looked like a man who had not slept. His eyes found me across the yard, and he stopped walking and just stood there at the edge of the gravel, taking in the sight of his 68-year-old mother standing in a garden with dirt on her knees and her back straight, and absolutely nothing about her that suggested she needed saving. His throat moved. He said, "Mom, I..." And then his voice broke completely, and he pressed the back of his hand against his mouth and stood there shaking with the effort of holding something in that was clearly too large to hold. I pulled out the chair across from mine at Clara's porch table. "Sit down, Brandon." He sat. He talked for a long time, the debt, the pressure Gary Pruitt's proposition, the way Jessica had framed it as opportunity, until the framing became the only version of events he could see. His voice moved between explanation and something rawer that kept breaking through the surface of the explanation, something that sounded underneath everything like a man trying to find the moment he became someone he did not recognize. I let him finish. Then I set the wooden box on the table between us. He recognized it immediately. His eyes filled and he pressed his lips together hard. I opened the latch and took out each thing slowly. The pawn receipt from the jewelry shop on Monroe Street, the one I had visited the week before his final semester, when the tuition balance was $4,000 more than what I had. I had pawned my wedding earrings, the ones Thomas had given me the night before our ceremony, the ones I had worn exactly twice, and had always intended to wear again. I had never redeemed them. Then the note, his handwriting at 18, careful and earnest on a piece of notebook paper. "When I make it, I will only take care of you." He picked it up with both hands. His shoulders shook once hard the way a structure shakes when something load-bearing gives way. I waited until he looked up at me. "Brandon," I said. My voice was steady and quiet and entirely certain. "If it had been you standing in that parking lot in the rain, if you were the one left there with bags you had filled for everyone else, would I have driven away?" The yard was completely still. Clara's roses moved slightly in the morning breeze. A barn swallow crossed the sky above the field and was gone. He opened his mouth. He tried. I watched him actually try to find something, any version of an answer that would not collapse entirely under the weight of what we both already knew. He could not find one. We sat with that truth for a long moment, the two of us in the morning light of a day that smelled like roses and turned earth, and the particular clean air of eastern Washington after a night of rain. Then I stood up. I laid my hand on the lid of the wooden box and slid it gently across the table until it rested in front of him. "The boy who wrote that letter," I said, "I would have done anything for him. I still would." I buttoned the top button of my jacket. "But I cannot keep waiting for him to come back. That is the one thing I cannot do for you." I walked inside. I did not look back, not because I did not want to, but because I had learned in 68 years of living that looking back at what you have chosen to leave only makes the leaving harder without making it any less necessary. In the months that followed, the things that needed to fall, fell. The bank foreclosed on Brandon's company assets in June. Jessica filed for divorce in late May, 3 days after the notice of default, moving quickly to legally separate her boutique holdings from his debt, a decision that left Brandon with nothing she had brought into the marriage and everything he had built on his own, which by then was very little. Diane relocated to a small apartment in a town 40 miles east of Spokane. Gary Pruitt's highway project stalled without the land corridor he had counted on, and 2 of his other ventures followed. I returned to my farm in September. Evelyn had kept the house exactly as I had left it. Thomas's photographs were back on the living room wall. She had retrieved them from the garage. The day after Brandon left, rehung each one herself and said nothing about it to anyone. I stood in the doorway of the living room and looked at his face in the afternoon light and felt the particular unspectacular peace of a woman who has set something down and does not intend to pick it up again. I planted sweet peas along the south fence in October. Thomas had liked the smell of them. God does not waste our hardest seasons. He hadn't wasted mine. I have told you this story not because I am proud of every moment in it, but because these revenge stories with Mom carry something worth passing on. Do not wait until you are standing in a parking lot in the rain before you see clearly who loves you and who is simply waiting for what comes after you. I waited too long. I loved too blindly. Do not make my mistake. A woman can spend 40 years building a life and still be foolish if she cannot tell the difference between someone who cherishes her and someone calculating her worth in dollars per acre. These revenge stories with Mom are not about bitterness. They are about waking up before it is too late. I believe God does not waste our hardest seasons. That is the heart of every family revenge stories worth telling. These family revenge stories exist because mothers learn things the brutal way and want someone else to carry it forward more gently. If these revenge stories with Mom reach something real in you, comment, share, and subscribe so we can keep telling these family revenge stories together. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. The stories ahead contain dramatized elements for reflection and education. If that is not for you, step away freely. But if you stay, I promise to make every minute worth your time.